I'm going to start off by saying this is not legal advice, and the reason you'll learn something about the issues involved. The reason it's not legal advice is that a number of reasons. The top two are legal things are very fact specific. So what may not seem like a big difference to you could be a big difference. And the second is things change over time. So what you hear tonight may not be the rule 2 months from now. The goal here is to tell you about certain things you need to be aware of and red flagging as they go off. So that's what we're going to do. Going through 5 categories. These are things that are important for you, and investors will be looking for whether you cover these. The first is, and I've put some interesting titles on them, picking the right front. We'll talk about that. Getting along with your accomplices and partners. Cutting others in on the action. Selling securities and raising capital legally, and protecting the goods. Hopefully this will be clearer to you as we go. Okay, the first is, what is the right front? What is the organizational form of this venture you're going to do? Well, for most technology ventures that we'll see through here, when you go through all the analysis of the different times, it usually comes down to a corporate form. And if there's a lot of outside equity financing, that often turns out to be Delaware. And the reason the corporate form is limited liability to the investors, so that if they put money in, they can't be personally liable for that. Delaware becomes a choice because the corporate law is developed more extensively there, and so if you have multiple rounds of financing, there's a lot more certainty as to what the result will be. So that often is where it comes down. Now the question is, when do you incorporate? And you should do this sooner rather than later. And again, it's personal liability on your part and on the part of partners that you bring in. And there's another reason with the corporate form is to minimize tax liability for you as an entrepreneur. And that brings up the dreaded Section 83. And it ties in nicely with some of the issues that Yost talked about in terms of divvying up equity. So what is Section 83? This is a very strange part of the Internal Revenue Code. I should say that these legal things we're covering tonight are U.S. based for those who are going to operate around the world. Some of them carry over, some of them don't. But so just put that caveat on it. So Section 83 says, if you receive property in connection with providing services, then you have ordinary income, which is taxed at 35% plus federally. And that ordinary income is equal to the fair market value of the property you get minus what you paid. So what does that mean? What does that mean? So what's property? In this case, it's stock. Stock is deemed to be property. So if you're the entrepreneur, you're typically the service provider, right? Because you're getting the stock because you're going to run the company. And normally you're not the capital provider. So if you receive stock, there may be an ordinary income hit. So here's an example that we can test this with. Suppose I like your idea, and I say I'll give you $1 million for 50% of the company. And let's say you're happy about that, right? So we're going to fund it, and 50% makes the math easy. So here's what it means. We set up the company, and the fair market value of what you get is possibly $500,000, because 50%, that's one way to look at it. And what did I pay for that if I'm the entrepreneur? 0. And so the ordinary income is $500,000, and at a 40% tax rate, when you lever everything up, you owe $200,000 in cash. Which you say, wait a second, if I had the cash, I'd just fund the company. Right? So this is sort of a big deal. Now, of course, $500,000 may not be the right answer. Is there another answer here? Of what's the fair market value of what you get? Well, it could be $1 million, right? Because if you're the entrepreneur and I put $1 million in for half the company, the other half of the company is worth arguably $1 million. So it could even be worse than this, $400,000. And the reason this happens, well, are you with me so far on that? Okay. The reason it happens is that people wait too long to incorporate. So you come in on a Friday and say, I've got a term sheet. Joe's going to give me $500,000, $1 million for half the company. Let's set the company up. Well, you're getting your stock at the very time the $1 million is going in. So the measurement of what your part is worth is hard to avoid the fact that if somebody's buying it for $1 million, the stock for $1 million, that the other half isn't worth $1 million. So the trick is to separate those two events as far as possible. So if you're really serious about a venture, you should think about incorporating early. You work your plan, you do all the other stuff, and it's 2 or 3 or 4 months later that at the earliest that you get a term sheet. So you already own your stock, assuming you've given the stock out to your people. Yeah, question? Well, when the venture capitalists walked in, it is a problem if you haven't incorporated. There are ways around it, but they're not pretty. So, you have enough problems starting companies. Don't create your own separate set. So you want to incorporate, you want to issue the stock, and then you want to make what's called an 83B election, which says if this stock is going to be subject to any vesting at all, you say, I want to take whatever hit I have for tax purposes today. And that's an election you have to file within 30 days. So what's the value of stock of a company that's just been incorporated? Well, it's not exactly zero because ideas are a dime a dozen, right? So it's whatever that math works out. But you separate the two events. Now, the problem is the stock often doesn't get issued in time, and it has to do with the issues that Yost talked about figuring out what the percentages are. And so you procrastinate. And, we'll get to it. It's sort of, we're too lazy or we're not sure who gets what. And so it drifts along and then we're back into the same problem again. And I'd like to give you a little graphic around what sometimes happens in this. And if we put a graph up, and the horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is relative importance. And I say in a situation where this often happens is you have and it doesn't relate just to this tax issue, but a broader issue of how you divvy up stock in a company. If you have a technical-based company, you have a technical person and a business person. What's the relative importance at the beginning of the technical person? Where would you put them? Yeah, you put it up high, right? Because if the thing doesn't work, you don't have a company. It's a great idea, but if it doesn't work, there's nothing. And what happens to the relative importance of the technical person over time? It's generally going down. Yeah, the slope doesn't matter. It's generally less important over time, relatively speaking. And the business people, just the opposite. And whether they cross or not is irrelevant. So picture the dynamic where the technical person's working all night, all weekends, everything, trying to get the thing working. And the business person sitting there saying, well, if you ever get the thing working, I could go out and market it and sell it. And so now we're having a discussion about how we divvy up the equity. Well, the person in the lab all night is saying, well, why am I giving up anything? This business guy isn't doing anything. And you can see where the tension is. It's recognizing this trend is very important for everybody. I had a situation in which we had a venture-backed company. We had the technical people working hard on this stuff, and they actually had the business people jumping through hoops, selling MBAs, going out and ordering chemicals and things like that. It was really fun to watch. And the business people were all sort of huffy about how they were getting, ordered around. And I said, look, guys, if they ever succeed in the lab, you got to figure out how to get there. And this was something where it was a big industry, and they better get it right. So we actually went back to Sloan School and spent a whole weekend there going back to business basics to get people back on track. But it finally dawned on me that understanding this is a really important thing. The relative importance is important. And if you haven't been through it, and you can see what the dynamics work out. Okay, so hopefully you get the stock issued in time and you can move on. So also on the organization front, there's the possibility of thinking of a subchapter S election. Now, in the U.S., we have from a federal tax purpose, basically two types of corporations: the regular corporation, the C corporation, and the S corporation. The C corporation is, most of any company on Wall Street. It's a public company. It means if they have a profit, it gets taxed, and the shareholders don't get taxed immediately on it. But there are two layers of taxation. With an S corporation, if you qualify, there's only one layer of tax. The corporation doesn't pay any tax. Qualification is 100 or fewer shareholders, one class of stock, and the shareholders have to be of a certain type. So actually venture capital or non-human being shareholders will destroy an S corporation. By that I don't mean that venture capitalists as people are not human, which people could argue it. It's just if partnerships or entities. So how does this work out if you look at the numbers? So just take, and you can throw as many zeros on the end of this. So the C corporation and the S corporation both have a net profit before tax of $100,000. And in the S corporation, the highest corporate tax rate is 35%, again federally, leaving $65,000. And then if you make a distribution out to shareholders, that's taxed at dividend rate of 15%, or maybe if you're Mitt Romney, it's 13.8% or whatever. Leaving net cash to owners of $55,000, or effective tax rate of 44, almost 45%. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today saying that that is really the issue. It's not that Mitt is paying 14%, it's just the cumulative is the 35 plus the 14. So it's really actually higher. It's a hard argument to put forth, but it doesn't play well with people who don't think about this type of stuff. Now the S corporation have $100,000 in net profit. There's no tax at the S level, but the profit is deemed distributed out to the shareholders in proportion to their ownership. So you don't necessarily get the cash, but you're deemed to have the stock. Ooh, what happened? Okay, back in business. There we go. So in an S corporation, no tax at the corporate level. The profit is deemed distributed to the shareholders, whether or not they get cash. Their tax rate would still be the same, 15%, so you get an effective tax rate that's much less. So this is a good thing to avoid taxes. Now, you might say, well, wait a second, most startups lose money, right? I mean, you're taking money in, you're investing in R&D, you're building something, hopefully you'll turn positive. So why do I care? And the issue has to do with the exit. So if you take the same scenario and throw a couple of zeros on the end, you can see what it would mean in the event of an acquisition. Now, one of the first spin-off of the Media Lab was a company called Diva. And Jonathan Harbour, the entrepreneur, had taken the course. He understood all this stuff. He says, well, we won't get, if we don't get venture funded, we really won't get a company off the ground. And so I don't need to worry about S corporation. I said, you qualify, go ahead and elect it. Just do it. You'll thank me. And sure enough, they didn't get any venture money. They had friends and family financing. There's a whole story about what it means to take money from family when Thanksgiving dinner comes around. It's like the board meeting from hell. And in the end of the day, they got acquired. Interesting story, Diva was Digital Video Application, DIVA. They were acquired by a company, and they made desktop publishing, desktop video editing for the Macintosh. They were acquired by a company called Avid, which is Diva spelled backwards, which made high-end video editing systems. So they obviously got a pretty good price, and they saved a good deal of money in the process. So you will want to think about subchapter S if you can. And then finally, in terms of picking the right organization and the entity, incorporating doesn't matter if you don't abide by the corporate formalities. You really do have to, sign things in the corporate name, keep minutes, act like a corporation. Because if you don't, the courts in certain circumstances will say, well, if you couldn't act like a corporation, we're not going to treat you like one. So all your protections go away. And the challenge of picking a company name, Diva was actually an interesting case. Their first name was Macromedia Business Applications. And it turned out there is a Macromedia company, but it also turned out that they had been using the term Macromedia earlier. And so the way they actually funded the company for the first round was they sold, quote, sold the trademark to Macromedia, got some money, and then they had to change their name. So I said, great, guys, pick a name. And it took weeks. And I thought, if these guys can't pick a name for a company, how are they ever going to succeed? And it turned out what they were really doing is thinking about the whole strategy of the company, because they chose a name, and it was no coincidence that the company they were targeting to be acquired by was Avid, Diva spelled backwards. So at the closing, they gave me a T-shirt that said Diva from home, and then on the back it said Avid to Hollywood. So it was an example of, it does matter sometimes. Okay, so that's picking the right organization, corporation, and that type of thing. Now, how do you get along with your, yeah. Yeah. Well, the question is, what does it mean to issue stock? Well, there would be minutes in the minute book saying the board has agreed this is a distribution. There would be, ideally, a certificate signed and dated. Yeah. Right. So, and the problem is even if you were inclined to backdate things, which is a really bad thing, you only have 30 days to make the 83B election. So you can't backdate even if you were so inclined and somebody would let you get away with it. You can't back up in time. Yeah, up and back.
What about the rules regarding companies established by non-U.S. citizens?
By, sorry?
By non-U.S. citizens.
Well, non-U.S. citizens can incorporate in the U.S., and there's no problem with that. So,
Do they have to incorporate in certain states?
No, incorporation is done on a state-by-state basis. So you pick a state in which to incorporate. So, a company I have here is actually a Delaware corporation, even though its physical presence is in Kendall Square. So, but you pick a state and you incorporate. It tends to be Delaware if you're going to be doing anything that would involve a good deal of financing. California is also better. Massachusetts is okay. It's not where it should be for a variety of reasons. But you can always change later on. But you don't want to do two steps if you can do one. Okay, let me zip along here. Now, sorting out relationships among your accomplices or partners. First of all, you've seen stories from Yoast about how these teams have a hard time dealing with each other. In a closely held corporation, shareholders actually owe each other fiduciary duty, which means you have to sort of treat them each other fairly, or you can get into trouble. There's a higher standard imposed on it. So when you get to these knockdown, drag-out fights, this is a layer that would apply. Whereas if I'm a shareholder in IBM and you're a shareholder in IBM, we don't really owe each other any duty. But in a closely held corporation, we would have some duties. So you're going to have to figure out who sits on the board of directors. That's one of the issues. And whether initially it's the whole founder team or you bring in some outside people. Those are questions that are always tricky. Who holds what titles? Now, from a legal viewpoint, the only officers you need in a corporation are the president, the treasurer, and the secretary, sometimes called the clerk in Massachusetts. Everything else is just titles. From a legal viewpoint, you do need those three officers. They can be the same person, but you do need those. You have the functional titles, CEO, COO, CTO. I was just in a meeting with a venture mentoring company. They are in the process of discussions with a major venture fund. And the question asked of the CEO, and we were having a meeting to say how do we respond, is where do you see, they have a very interesting founding team. They're experienced in their own right, but they're not, that old. They're still fairly young. And the venture capitalist was asking the CEO, well, where do you see everything in 18 months? Who's going to be doing what, and how are you going to get there? And that was the process of thinking through that. And there were issues about, do we want to even give out C-level titles at this point? Because you may need to bring in people from the outside. You also have to think about restrictions on transfers of stock. If we all get the stock, what happens if one of us leaves? Or if somebody wants to sell? So often there are rights of first refusal, meaning if I want to sell, do I have to offer it to the company? Do I have to offer it to the company and then the other shareholders, and do they have a right to buy? Tag-along rights is the other side. If you're selling, can I jump on board and go with you? Sometimes called post-sale rights. You may want to have, if you're an S corporation, provisions in your agreement that preserves the S status. It says, you can't transfer it to somebody that would disqualify the S corporation. You may want to carve out transfers between family members. So if I want to make a gift to my children or something, that doesn't have to be, offered back to the company. Also, there may be mechanisms for intramural disputes among each other. I like the rock, scissors, paper. It's probably legally binding. Do you do 3 out of 5 times? You have to, yeah. All of this stuff is in the founder's memo, which is in the class materials for the website. So before you do anything, go read that. It lays everything out with issues you need to think about. This is a high-level view of that. Any questions on that stuff at this point? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about income to the entrepreneur while they're still working on the venture, and whether that would be taxed as wages or structured to be taxed as wages?
So the question is, well, you sort of said by the question you got the answer. What's income to the entrepreneur during the growth of the business? Is it going to be structured as wages, or what was the other?
As dividends on the stock.
Dividends. And certainly there are ways in which people do pay out dividends. If it's, for most of the startups here, it's not going to matter. But if you have a very profitable company, you can picture that wage income gets Social Security and other things attached to it. Dividend income doesn't. So if you're at a level where there's a lot of money being distributed, they're going to first say, essentially, did you pay a reasonable wage? And we'll characterize that part as wages. And then how about dividends on top of that? But that's probably not going to be an issue for most startups. I hope it is, but it won't be. Okay, cutting others in on the action. So you have your sort of founders team. How do you get other people involved? Well, first of all, let's just take a trip through the company's capital structure. We have debt and equity. Debt is basically borrowed money. It can be borrowed from private individuals, banks, if you're lucky to be able to get financing from a bank early on. You'll hear about a little bit of this tomorrow during our financing session. Other sources could be, loans from suppliers or customers, deferred payment and that type of thing. They're stipulated rates of interest with no really significant upside. It's just debt like you're used to it. When we flip to the equity side, you're talking about stock, and there's sort of a stack of potential stock things. At the highest level is preferred stock. The word sort of says it. It's preferred above anything else. And in the materials for tomorrow night, there's a PowerPoint called Venture Capital Deal Terms, which will go into a lot of detail about these specific bullet points here. And we could do a whole session just on that. But preferred stock is usually given to venture capitalists and other investors. It comes before anybody else's stock. Often has a liquidation preference, which means if the company gets sold, a classic is I put $1 million in, I get the first $1 million out. That would be a straight liquidation preference. Often, and certainly in the venture community, it's convertible to common. So if I like it, I can convert to the common and share on the upside. There are things called participating preferred, which you get both. You get a liquidation preference. If the company's sold, I get the first $1 million, and then I convert based on the conversion ratios that are in the agreement, and I then get a piece of the common side. There are typically anti-dilution provisions, which say, look, if you offer stock or if you sell stock after I come in at a price that's lower than I do, then I'm going to get more shares when the time comes to convert. So there's this big long mathematical formula that says I start off 1 to 1, 1 share preferred to 1 share common. Now you issue some stock that's cheap. Now maybe 1 share of preferred gets 1.2 shares of common or whatever. There's usually board representation on the part of preferred stock, and they often have veto rights over certain transactions. So they're trying to protect a provision, a position in the capital stack. And if you look at this venture capital deal terms presentation, it'll explain what some of these provisions are and why they're there, given the nature of venture investing. There's a separate PowerPoint in the materials for tomorrow, which is called A Beginner's Guide to Venture Capital. So if you've never understood or how a venture capital fund works, this is one to really look at because it explains to you what the venture capitalists have to do from their side and why they behave the way they do, and you get a better understanding. So then we move down to the common stock. Well, the common stock is basically what's left after everyone else gets paid, right? It's after the debt gets paid, after the preferred stock. And in a startup, it could be worth a dime a dozen, and if it's founder stock in Google, it's worth you're a billionaire, right? So it's what's left after everyone else, usually given to founders and employees. No liquidation preference or convertibility. It's just basic, a piece of the economic return of the company after everyone else gets paid. Then there are options and warrants, which are rights to buy shares, typically common stock. And so they're right to buy for a certain period of time at a certain price. So those are sort of the menu items that you have when you figure out how to divvy up the equity. And if you're saying, how do I, so I'm going to give out equity to, so we're taking care of the founders. What about the other people? What fraction of the equity typically goes into an equity compensation pool? This is driven off your business plan if you're doing it right. In the plan that Charlie gave, I think there's in the template that comes with it, there's a headcount section. And as you figure out who do I need to build out the company, trying your different scenarios, you'll have different developers and other people, and you'll have percentages for equity that they get, and we'll talk about how you determine that. And you sort of build out your headcount for 2 to 3 years, and that tells you how much you need to put in an equity pool if you're going to plan to give out equity more broadly. You have to ask yourself, though, does equity really motivate people? And I'm convinced it really doesn't until somebody gets a piece of paper that turns into a house or a fancy car. The first company I worked with was a spinoff of Pew Roberts, which was one of Ed Roberts' company. Ed is a professor at Sloan. We had a triple-decker house up in Cambridge where we had our offices. Pew Roberts was on the first 2 floors. We were at the roof area. My first day at work, I was the number 3 employee there. Time came, I had to go down and use the bathroom, which was located a half bath under the stairs of an old triple-decker. So you open up. You've probably seen these. You open it up, you go in, it's just got the toilet. And I'm looking around. The entire little half bath is papered in real live stock certificates. And I always thought it was a real, it was a real jolting moment. Get back to work unless you want to work for wallpaper. So either these pieces of paper can mean something or they can't. There really is a great philosophy. Maybe we'll spread the equity around, but you do have to ask yourself, do people understand what it really means at the end? And I can give you a bunch of stories about why I believe that most people don't understand that. So what does this mean in terms of amount of the company? Typically in a first round traditional venture financing, typical venture, professional venture, a first outside round of financing, you have somewhere between 12 to 18% of the total equity will be reserved for a pool for employees and others. And it's on the low side if you have a pretty full developed team, and it's on the high side if you have to hire in a CEO. That's typical. It varies, but that would be a good midpoint, as you'll see. You can ask Brad Feld tomorrow night what he sees for an option pool, because he'll be open about it. Who's eligible for these equity participation? It could be employees, it could be just middle-level people, it could be directors or consultants, or anybody who you think you need to motivate to make you, able to achieve what the plan says. Determining the size of the award, it's really, there's always a market for this stuff. What does a vice president of engineering get? Well, you can go out and find that through various sources out there, surveys and other things to figure out what is typical today, and it varies over time. When the internet was blowing apart at the end, everybody wanted equity because there were great stories about how much money you could make. So even the lowest level employee figured they would want equity. 2 years later, everyone wanted cash. Right? I don't want wallpaper. So it does vary over time. The forms of equity compensation, there are three basic forms. One is restricted stock. The second is what's called incentive stock options, or tax qualified, and the third is non-qualified. I'll dip into these at this point. Restricted stock is stock that's sold or given to you outright, usually when the value is low. And the reason for that is that Section 83 issue that we talked about. If I give you stock when the company's worth a lot of money, you're going to have income. So the typical thing is restricted stock certainly can be given early on in the company because the tax hit that you have is low. It will switch to something else later on. The benefit is that it starts the capital gains holding period. So when you own a piece of property, stock or a building or something, the longer you hold it, you have to get to a point where it turns from ordinary income to capital gains. And so actually owning the stock starts that time period. Also starts the Securities and Exchange Commission holding periods for certain rules about when you can sell. Typically subject to vesting and buyback by the company. So here's the issue. If we go back to the earlier situation in which we have a capital provider and the entrepreneur. So let's say I'm the investor and I say, gee, I'll give you $1 million for half of the company. When my check clears and the money's in the bank account, I've essentially done everything I said I would do. Oh yeah, I'll be there to advise and I'll certainly be looking after my investment. But I've done basically everything. And you as entrepreneur, you've got a business plan that or pitch deck or whatever, it says, here's what I'm going to do. And most of the times you haven't actually really done it because we're talking about funding a company to get going. So the question is, how do I, having put $1 million in and done everything, make sure that you're actually going to do your part? Well, that's where vesting comes in. Vesting says, okay, you got half the company, but if you leave, you're going to give up some of the stock. Because I'll take that stock and go hire somebody else to try to come and do it. And so vesting of stock is very typical, both among founders when venture capitalists come in, and also for employees. It's, how do I provide the incentive and keep something out in front of people? I think it's really good for founders to think about self-imposing vesting, because if you're going to go out for a lot of reasons, internally, if one of the people leaves, but if you go out and you don't have any vesting and you're getting a term sheet from a venture capitalist, you can be sure that they're going to put a vesting schedule on it. So if you have a really good philosophy of why we picked this schedule, and that's how we're sticking with it, you can resist a more onerous schedule that might be imposed by an outside financer. Question up top?
Yeah. When you say if you leave or someone leaves,
Yeah.
who determines whether someone has left, I guess?
Well, that's well, they don't show up anymore, I guess.
No, but I mean,
Right.
from a legal perspective, right?
It's basically say if you cease to be, there are a whole different ways of doing it. For an outside, as an employee, is if you cease to be an employee or off the payroll, that could be one. If you're an outside consultant, it would be, cease to provide substantial services. There's some wording there that just ensures that there's a way to get those shares back if the person hasn't done it. Now, this is where 83B, what we talked about earlier, is. Remember I said that if you get property, stock, in connection with providing services, you have ordinary income, and we gave the example of $500,000 versus $1 million. Well, the rule says, when do you measure that ordinary income? Well, if you have vesting, the rule says you don't measure it when you get the stock, you measure it when the vesting's over. So think about that. We had a situation where I could have had $1 million worth of income, but now I'm going to have, say, 4-year vesting. So we go along and I'm growing, the company value is getting higher and higher, and 4 years go by, click. Let's say it's 4 years before anything vests. All of a sudden I'm fully vested. 83 says that's when you measure it. Well, the company could be worth, hopefully, tens of millions of dollars then. So I have a hugely larger tax thing. 83B says, look, I'll take my hit today. And you file and say, I've got this property, it's subject to vesting, and I declare here the value is today, and pay taxes based on that. So that's something, and people who have forgotten 83B elections are very, very sad when the time comes. There was a story about biotech company on the West Coast that brought in its first CFO after 3 rounds of financing. They had raised $50 million. There was all the stock out in the hands of employees, all of which was vesting, and nobody had filed an 83B election. There was probably $25 to $30 million worth of taxable income just waiting as a time bomb to hit. Needless to say, the lawyers and the accountants got sued, and we don't know how it was settled, but I'm sure that an accommodation was made by the insurance companies. So just remember 83. Now, incentive stock options are options that comply with certain tax requirements. One of the important part is it's only for employees. So these are special options called incentive stock options. You don't get taxed, unlike stock, you don't get taxed when you're given the option or when the option vests. So I give you a piece of paper, it says, here's a right to purchase stock on this schedule. If you're here a year from now, you can buy 100 shares. If you're here 2 years from now, you can buy 200 shares. No tax on any of that. Only tax is on exercise, possibly an alternative minimum tax on exercise. And if you hold it the requisite period of time, you may even get capital gains treatment on it, which is good. The alternative minimum tax is actually, if you have a lot of the stock of the company, you probably are going to get taxed on exercise when you work all the math out. But for most people, it's a good way to get equity participation to employees. So the scenario is early stage employees, founders want to get the stock outright at lowest price as possible, pay the smallest amount of tax. Over time, the company value goes up. It gets more and more expensive to actually get the stock outright, so you tend to switch over to options because you can defer the timing of when you take the hit and wait until you exercise. Non-qualified stock options are not tax advantage. You're completely free pretty much in how you deal with them. There can be some accounting issues if you have them at too low a price, or if you reprice them, or if you do performance vesting. No tax on the granting or the vesting, but when you exercise, it is ordinary income. So not a great scenario, but you can time it. So if the company's going public and you can sell, you might exercise and get the cash, pay the tax, be happy the value went up. So if you were an advisor to a company, you'd be looking at, if you couldn't get the stock outright, you'd be doing non-qualified options. So the question is, what is vesting? We talked a little bit. The concept is I want to provide incentive there to achieve what we said we were going to do in the plan. Well, in an ideal world, the vesting would relate not to specific time, but when you actually achieved it. You said you were going to develop this thing. So when you have the first customer ship, that's when your stock vests. And that would be the ideal way to make sure the motivation's lined up. The problem is, as you can imagine, the first product concept often isn't the real one we go with. We pivot, we do other things, we change the business model. And so defining exactly what an event is where you've actually achieved what you said you were going to do gets really tricky. So that's where calendar vesting comes in. It says, look, if we're all in the boat, we're all rowing hard, then you're going to get rewarded for rowing. And hopefully if we're lucky and we're smart and we work hard, we'll have something of value. Typical vesting is 4 years in most venture deals. The standard recently has been cliffhanger the first year. That is, if you leave in the first year, you get nothing. And then it starts vesting either quarterly or monthly thereafter, up to 4 years. There's also the issue, does vesting accelerate on an acquisition or an IPO? And there are arguments on both sides, certainly with respect to an acquisition or change in control, whether you want to vest it fully, because the people that are buying the company, are also going to want to provide incentives to keep the employees on board. And so there's some argument that says if you accelerate those too quickly, it'll simply reduce the purchase price you have. And it's a debate that can go both ways, and I've been on boards where we've had long discussions about it. So think carefully about that if you ever get to it, and seek out what the current advice is at the time. So what happens, how do these rights go away? For example, options, do you get them forever? Well, they actually have a rule that says you have to exercise within 90 days after you leave employment. What if somebody leaves because they were bad? They stole secrets or for cause type things? Do you forfeit them? And what if you violate the agreements you sign, if you go to work for a competitor or non-solicitation? These are all issues that will be worked out when you put together your plan. When can the employer buy back? So if you have an option or stock and you leave the company, do you get to keep it forever? Or can the employer come and say, okay, the value of the stock has gone from $1 to $10, we'll buy it back for $10. People have different views on that. It's always is one view. You can always have a right to buy back when employment ends. If you breach something like, violate agreement, or never. Those are the different menu items that people choose from. So that's the basic scenario of how do you provide others with a stake in the company. Any questions there? And the idea is to have a bit of a red flag, have an idea of what the concepts are, remembering that these could change, and you'll seek out with appropriate advice at the time the thing that's right for what you need to do in order to get your plan executed. Are we okay? Yeah. Yeah, well, the question is, until you have an acquisition or a funding event, how do you know what the value of the stock is? Well, there are people, probably some people at Sloan who, will someday be out there doing valuations. In fact, it's very typical because in incentive stock options, you have to grant the options at fair market value, that you get a periodic appraisal. You'll go out and hire someone to do an evaluation of the company. And they have different techniques they use. And you're doing that to make sure that it'll get the tax treatment. Ultimately, really, it's what somebody actually will pay for the stock and what you'll be willing to sell it for. Okay, are we all right? Yep.
Do you have a template like what works for most startup companies, or
Well, most startup companies would follow the path that I said. You restricted. Certainly the founders want to make sure they get their stock early on. And then over time, as things get more expensive, you shift over to options. Now, I will say an option holder does not have the rights of a stockholder. They don't vote. They don't necessarily get the right to see financial records or anything else. So sometimes you want to be a little careful if you're a founder and you're bringing in some people right after and giving them actual stock, because they will have rights as shareholders. But typically, it's economics drives the behavior. You'll usually have an ISO, incentive stock option plan, at some point. Because of some accounting treatments, people are starting to switch more to restricted stock and providing, if there's money, if the company has enough cash, then you can give somebody a bonus to help pay the tax that happens when they hit. But that's not really for a startup. So startups still tend to do options, and over time, as they get more profitable and there's more cash, later down the road, they'll switch over to restricted stock plans. And the size is the pool that I talked about. And the way you determine it is to roll out the headcount plan for a variety of reasons, making sure everyone's relatively compensated. It's the thing about compensation. There's the absolute level. Am I getting paid enough? And then there's the relative level. Well, how come Mary's getting more than I am? And you have to assume word gets around. Everyone will know it. So if your tendency is to keep everything really close to the vest, don't assume that you can keep it tight. So transparency at some point becomes probably the best policy. Okay.
Maybe he's asking something more specific. Like,
okay.
Is there a set of actual documents that are a good default boilerplate set, or does every specific lawyer have their own particular variety if you're paying the lawyer for what really?
Well, there are some standard documents. They'll vary by firm, and they vary over time because some new wrinkle comes along and they'll update them all. But that's the whole issue. Who do you pick as a lawyer? You want to go to a firm that knows how to do this type of stuff and has done, standard kind of plans forever, unless you really like to custom craft things. Okay. Okay, last two topics: selling securities and raising capital legally. Remember, when we had the virtual ink cover page, and I had the nice logo, and then it had the little confidentiality, and then it had the big legal stuff there. There is a problem in selling securities that you have to be aware of. First of all, paper everything, even friendly deals. Make sure you get it down in writing. That's Yost said that, even if it was email. But certainly when it comes to issuing percentages of stock, it's really important to get it written down in some fashion. And people often would say, well, I want you to write a contract that's really strong and ironclad and all of that stuff. And sure, I'll do that. But the real question in contracts is, at the end of the day, if we're looking at the contract to resolve a dispute, we probably haven't done the right work up front to figure out how to avoid the dispute. And so contracts often be, the best kind of contracts actually try to say what's going to happen. What are your expectations, what are mine, and get it resolved beforehand so you never have to look at it. But that's an important part of the process. Now, using the business plan to sell securities presents a whole bunch of problems beyond just dealing with venture capitalists and corporate investors, et cetera. And the reason is it could be illegal. In fact, it is illegal. Under federal law, all offers, not even sales, offers of securities have to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the registration is basically the IPO process, the initial public offering. Very expensive, very time consuming. So you can't even offer unless it's registered, unless there's an exemption available, and typical exemptions for startups are private placements. So private placements, in any of these things, this is like trying to do brain surgery on yourself. Get somebody who knows what they're doing from a securities law viewpoint, and they don't have to be expensive, just people that know what they're doing. Typically, you'll be dealing in private placements with accredited investors. There are rules about you can have a certain number of non-accredited, but you basically want people that know that have the money to do it, to handle it. Accredited, there's a bunch of definitions, but it's typically income of $200,000 individually, or with a spouse, $300,000, or net worth of $1 million. There are a whole bunch of things describing what risk factors are. You have to provide capitalization table. And under SEC Rule 10b-5, you can't fail to tell somebody something important. If you do, if you omit something, you can be liable for it. So you put an offering document out there that says, oh, by the way, it forgets to say we've just been sued for patent infringement and we've lost the first round in the court. That would be a material misstatement or omission. And so all these things have to go in place in a private placement in order to comply with the securities law. Now, if you think about the typical, also you can't make public pronouncements on the web or other things. There are some bills pending, however, that would allow crowdsourcing of investment. Tomorrow night we'll hear a little bit about, one of the people tomorrow night is going to talk about using crowdsourcing to sell product and raise money that way, but that's not selling securities. There is a bill that's been introduced that would allow crowdsourcing of investment, and we'll have to see. That would be very useful at one level, though it would be fraught with problems at another. So we'll have to, I think Senator Kerry was involved in that. There are also blue sky laws, so not only federal law, but state law applies. And the issue is two things. One, it can be criminal, and you can do time. And also, if you do it wrong, there's a rescission offer that can be done, which means you have to offer to give everyone back their money. And it's personal liability. So you as a founder could be personally liable to give the money back. So setting up the corporation doesn't help because if you've ended up violating the security law. So one way to make sure you at least don't fall into it, don't put in your business plan a section that says, and we are offering to sell 10% of the company for $2 million. That is an offer. Never put anything in there like that. The business plan really should be, look, I've got this idea. These are the customers, all the things we've talked about. Here's how we're going to bring it to market or how we're going to capitalize on it. Here are the resources we need. We're not telling you how we're going to get them. This is the plan. Now, we can have a separate discussion if you like that and you're a venture capitalist, well, then you may qualify directly for private placement. We don't have to go much further. If you end up saying, well, I'm going to go out to an extended group of individuals or angels, now we may have to go and paper that up with a bunch of things, including risk factors and other things in order to comply. But if you have right in the plan saying we're going to offer to sell 10% of the company for $2 million, it's kind of hard to avoid the part back here that says offer. Right, so don't offer. It is a big deal. And in the materials, there are 3 columns, I think, from the Boston Business Journal. One is entitled Tragedy in 3 Acts, about a company that otherwise was doing absolutely great until they tripped over this. And they ended up being blown out of the water, and it was fortunate they didn't end up going to jail. So, okay, any questions on securities law? Yeah, okay, good. Final topic, protecting the goods. We're talking intellectual property as this last topic that's important. Remember from Fiona Murray's video, there are 4 key areas for startups for advantage. One is intellectual property, controlling the knowledge. And then she talked about secrecy. Nobody else knows how to do it. Speed, just move fast and get ahead, and locking in customers, if you remember that set of discussions. So here we're going to be talking about IP to helping your business plan. If you're in a technology company area, investors are going to want to know what is protectable, and you can use it as a valuable asset to raise capital. There's actually correlation with success if you have done a good job with intellectual property. The company that I run, called IP Vision, has run close to 10,000 reports on venture-backed companies as part of an investment screening process for a late-stage venture fund. And we took a subset of that, of 1,000 companies from 5 top-tier venture funds, including Kleiner Perkins, New Enterprise, Domain, and using our ratings about how to re-rate the intellectual property, the companies that scored in the top quarter of our scores, turned out 85% were winners, meaning they had gone public or been acquired, and only 15% had gone out of business. So we looked at portfolios and say, how do we measure a portfolio? Well, we know people went public or were acquired. Those are winners. We know people are out of business. Those are losers. Everyone else in between, we don't know where they are. They're still there. If you consider that even the most experienced venture, Kleiner Perkins kind of guys who have all the money and talent and connections, are happy if they get 1 hit out of 3, or 33% batting average. The fact that if you manage your intellectual property well, in hindsight, the people that do that well win 6 times out of every 7 attempts. It's not causation, but it's correlation. And so investors are starting to look at this. Are you managing your IP well? Do you actually own the IP that you say you have? And have you looked at your competitors to make sure they can't block you? If you've been reading the newspapers at all, you will see all the patent litigation and suits that are going on out there. So it's a new world. So let's look at IP protection here in not too long. We probably won't get through all of this tonight. First, there's none. I just have no protection. There's trademark, copyright, trade secret, patent, and then combinations. These are the types of menu items of intellectual property. Trademark can be valuable. It's brand. It's a mark under which you sell your goods or services. It's something where people hear the name or see the word or the phrase and they associate it with a given source. So if I say Mercedes-Benz, you think of a luxury automobile. If I say Yugo, you're not quite sure what kind of automobile that is. You want to pick a name that's somewhat fanciful, like Apple. Well, who would have ever thought about Apple for originally computers and now mobile devices? iPod Mimeo was a good one from Virtual Inc. And you don't want to pick descriptive things that merely say what we're doing. Our storage technology, well, we're a disk drive company. That's not too happy. For the business plan, you can actually check the availability of marks at the U.S. Patent Office there. And you don't actually really need to do much other than use it in commerce, and you can register it. It's not too expensive, and it lasts as long as you keep renewing it. And it can create barriers to entry. So I can't come along with an Apple computer and try to steal Apple's business. Copyright is really the right to prevent others from making copies. So in theory, if Yost sat down and wrote a novel, and I sat down and wrote a novel, and we never looked at each other's novel, and they were the exact same novels, there wouldn't be a copyright infringement. On the other hand, if I copied his stuff, that would be an infringement. It protects the expression, not the underlying idea. So it would be great for music, but not so great for software. Really, in your business plan, if it relates to software, the biggest issue you have is, do you actually own the software, the copyright? The rule is that an author, person who actually writes it, owns the copyright unless that's being written in connection with employment, in which case the employer owns it. And by employment, I mean really an honest-to-goodness employee with W-2 income and all of that. So if you hire an outside independent contractor or a part-time programmer who's not on your payroll, that programmer actually owns what you're paying the person to do. You don't actually own it. And they could go off and do something with it. So this is the kind of thing on due diligence when they say, do you actually own the software? You solve that by getting an assignment or an agreement to assign as part of the contract. You'll sign up with the independent programmer. And you better have that in the file. You'll also want to check these days open source to make sure if you're using open source, you're complied with the license, because otherwise you may have tainted code that's the basis for your investment, the outside investors. Running out of time. Good. Trade secrets. This is the ultimate protection. If somebody doesn't know how you do it, they can't do it, and the famous one is Coca-Cola. The formula supposedly is not known. But in order to do this, you have to protect it. You have to keep it from being disclosed, and you do that with non-disclosure agreements and other techniques for making sure the toothpaste doesn't get out of the toothpaste tube. It's hard to get it back in. For your business plans, certainly don't put anything describing the technology in detail that would be anywhere near giving away the trade secret. As we've heard before, you're trying to say, what is the benefit that whatever I'm doing provides? You're not trying, at the stage of the business plan, you're not even trying to explain how you do it. Keep that a secret as long as possible. Then we turn to, and trade secrets can last forever. There's no end to it until you lose the secret. Finally, there's patents, which is really the strongest form of intellectual property if you're going to have to disclose it. It's a limited time monopoly. We don't like monopolies in the United States and most parts of the world. And yet in the Constitution, there's a recognition that without giving inventors the right to control their invention for some period of time, nobody's going to describe how they do it. And so we have a system which is a federally granted right to get a patent on anything that's new, non-obvious, and useful, and we'll explain that in a moment, and fits within certain categories. It has to be applied for, and it has to be granted, and that's a whole process by the Patent Office. It's very much like real estate, in that when you own a piece of real estate, the fundamental right you have is to keep people off the real estate, to keep trespassers off. So if you walk across my land, I can, keep you off of it. The police can come and throw them out. But just like, that's the way to think of it. Often people think if you have a patent, it means you can actually do what you patented. And it's not technically correct. It's you can keep others from doing what you've patented. What does that mean? Well, it's very much like real estate. I may own a piece of property that I can't get to without walking across your land. So I may not actually be able to use my property if I'm not careful, but I can keep you off mine. And, the other reason in real estate, you might have other rules that prohibit you actually using the property the way you want. There could be zoning laws, access issues, etc. The claims of the patent are like the fence around the property. They define what the space is that you can keep other people out from. It's a very important thing to think of it as an exclusionary right, not a right to actually do it yourself. And the duration is 20 years from the filing of the patent in the U.S. Now, to get a patent, It has to be something new. It hasn't been done before, which means as part of it, you have to show that what the prior art is out there. Is there anything else out there you're aware of? It has to be useful. That isn't usually a problem. Most inventions are somewhat useful. Even propeller head beanies that spin around and keep you cool is useful. It may not be economically valuable. And it has to be patentable subject matter, so you can't patent life forms and other things. There's a whole set of esoteric things that patent lawyers worry about in patentable subject matter. But suffice it, most of the stuff you guys are going to do probably are patentable. The key part is you cannot have previously sold or publicly described the invention. You have a 1-year window in the United States. That is, you could describe the invention, and then you have 1 year to get a patent application on file. And if you do, you won't lose your patent rights. However, the rest of the world, if you disclose before you file, you probably will lose the right to patent. And I had an unfortunate situation when I was in Istanbul talking to a fellow from Egypt who had a technology he claimed increased the bandwidth capacity of wireless networks by 4 times. And I started talking, he wanted some feedback, and I said, well, where are you on your patenting? Oh, well, we're thinking of doing that. I said, okay, well, you better get on that pretty soon. You didn't tell me how you did it in the presentation, but if you start to explain how you did it, then you're going to have a problem, and his face went white. He had published a technical paper that described it. So he may have actually blown the right to get a patent in any other country except perhaps the United States, depending on when it was. So you want to be very careful with that. The disclosure has to be an enabling disclosure. So if I stand up and say, in order to have a problem, if I stand up and say, I've invented anti-gravity boots, and this is a public arena, I haven't really disclosed how I do it. So it's not really a disclosure that would trip this 1-year rule. But if I started to explain technically how I did it, enough so that you could figure out what I was doing, then that would become an enabling disclosure and would be a problem. The final thing is that the invention it has to be non-obvious. That is, things that are obvious can't be patented. And the standard is to one of ordinary skill in the art. And around MIT, that becomes one you have to look at a little carefully, because I was dealing with an MIT professor who was saying, well, this was an obvious invention. It was so obvious. I said, well, are you sure? Are you sure your invention is so obvious? Well, yeah, I mean, it's intuitively obvious, even to the most casual observer, which usually back in my days meant I don't really know the hell what I'm talking about, but it's intuitively obvious. So I said, go talk to a patent lawyer. He may find different, and it turned out it wasn't. And they went out and they started the company, and they grew it up, and they sold it for $100 million. But he would have given up on it because it was obvious, he thought. So,
it's worth pointing out that over IAP, there's half dozen or more
patent types.
libraries, the licensing office, the Wellness and MIT president, around variations to learn more about this topic.
Right. So, given the time, I'm just going to run this slide, and then in light of that, the takeaway, the rights you get when I say trespasses is it's the freedom to make, license, or sell your product. So if you have a patent in the U.S. and I look at it and I say, oh, that's a great idea, and I go over to China and I make a device that's described by your patent, I can't then bring it back into the U.S. I could go to China if you don't have a patent in China, because patents are country by country, and make it there and use it there. But I couldn't make it and bring it back, or I couldn't make it here and I can't sell it here. And so there are a whole bunch of things around ownership of did you license it? Did you get the assignments? Things that will come up in due diligence. And then finally, we could go on for a number of pages, but you have to think of what your patent strategy is. Patents are expensive. A government accounting office study, about 10 years old now, said that even for a small company, which doesn't really pay the same fees that a large company does, to take a single patent and get it and maintain it for over its life in 10 industrialized countries could run close to $500,000. So you don't want to run and just patent anything. You want to think about what the strategy is. And especially if you have a really core invention, which often happens around this place. You want to really focus on getting that one or two patents, whatever you can afford, strongest as possible. And then you want to make sure that you prevent others from patenting around you. So the simple example I use is, let's say I had invented the first one ever to invent a vessel to hold a liquid, like a cup. And nobody had ever done it, and I got a patent on it. And you come along and you say, wow, that's a great invention, but there are other things it needs to commercialize. Like, I pick it up, I burn my hand. So let's see, I'll put a handle on it, maybe on the side. So I'll patent a handle going on a cup, or maybe a handle on top, or maybe a lid, or maybe an insulating material. And so somebody might come around and patent all of the commercial implementations of your core invention. And what that effectively does is steal a lot of the value of your core invention. Because you can't go, even though the person couldn't come and put a handle on my cup, because that might infringe my cup patent, I can't put a handle on my cup because the other guy has the handle patent. So you can actually, it's called picket fencing. So the way you avoid that is you try to get the strongest core patent you can, and then you disclose the rest of it yourself. You say in the patent application or elsewhere, this is a great invention, and there are a lot of things we could do with it. But I'm not necessarily claiming these things. But you can do this, this, and this. And having done that, then nobody else can come along and say that it was their idea. So think of it as you got a castle you're building, and you don't want the bad guys to sneak up. So you sort of torch everything in front of it. So you burn all the trees down, you clear out the battlefield, so somebody can't sneak up on you and fence you in. And with that, and since it's 9 o'clock, I will call it quits for the evening. And we'll see you here tomorrow.